180 Place is working hard to end and prevent homelessness across the region. Today, I talk one-on-one with Chief Executive Officer Stacey Denaux for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Stacey Denaux, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Good to see you, Quintin.
Likewise, I know that obviously you are the Chief Executive Officer of 180 Place. And I know 180 Place obviously tries to help end and prevent homelessness here in the Lowcountry.
Yes.
What's new? What's now at 180 Place?
So a lot is new and a lot is the same, as the rest of the world really is coming sort of out of COVID and dealing with kind of the longer term ramifications of the health impact, but also really more the financial impact. So what's been new for us over the last 2 years or so that we're hoping to continue post-COVID is really a focus on more of an acute focus on the health of our clients, but also on homelessness prevention. We've had some unique opportunities with some of the COVID funding to really keep people in their home, keep people out of a shelter environment, and so it is working. We are showing now some longer-term success that 88% of the people we get housed are staying housed for 2 years or more. So we really use this opportunity to kind of test the theory that if you can prevent someone from becoming homeless, they will actually stay housed, and that's true. So we're really focusing on using that data to tell that story and continue to gather resources to work on the prevention side of our mission.
How many resources do you need more to actually help with this?
So over the past year or so, we have just in the prevention realm, we've allocated close to $300,000. Obviously, we could use a lot more than that, but what this is allowing us to do is really focus on those people for whom eviction will most likely end up in homelessness. So these are very low-income renters. Typically, there are families, so there are young children involved. So we're really working to find the most vulnerable with those limited resources, target those resources where we can have the most impact. And so far, now that we're about 3 years into this higher level of funding, it is working.
Now, how much longer, Stacey, will that funding continue?
We are lucky in that we have some sources that are running through 2024. Wow. So our hope is that as local funders, state funders, federal funders look at that long-term success, that we'll start to see some patterns there and some more permanent funding that's not just related to COVID or an immediate crisis, that we're actually going to invest in homeless prevention.
What are those other patterns that you and your team are looking at right now with that?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Yeah, what are those other patterns that you and your team are looking at in regards to what you just mentioned?
Sort of other patterns? Yeah, yes, so we really are noticing a growth in very young families. So parenting youth is kind of the term. So parents who are 20, 21, 22 years old, some with multiple children, and they just need a special set of services. And so if we can capture that family while they are housed and help them be more stably housed, that has huge impact on that family. And then we engage in services to really help stabilize them in other aspects that might not be related to housing. So young parenting families is really where we're seeing significant growth and need for resources in the homeless population, or those that are on the cusp of becoming homeless.
And what is that percentage right now, Stacey, of those people who are actually on the brink of being homeless, unfortunately?
That is a very hard number to quantify. So we really have to rely on referral services or services like a 211 or a housing crisis line to quantify that. And last year, there were over 15,000 calls to our local housing crisis line for people who were in some state of housing instability. Not all of those people were homeless, obviously, and so then our process is to really work through with as many callers as we can to find those who are the most vulnerable to target those resources. So it is a harder number to quantify because often if someone is housed, it might be not very stable, they might not be on someone else's radar. So we really have to rely on those community partners, opportunities like this to get the word out about how you can call to reach those resources.
Now, how many referral services do you all use or have right now?
Officially, we are just sort of the network of other providers. 211 is a huge referral through Local United Way. And then, we've been around a long time, so there's a much more informal referral network. So churches or houses of worship who have been with us since the beginning, a lot of companies. We often get calls from restaurant managers or hotel managers or someone that says, I have a busboy and he's sleeping in his car, Or, I have this great front desk clerk at the hotel, and we put her up in the hotel for a couple of nights, but she needs a long-term housing solution. So there are those formal channels, but the informal channels are really where we're finding that people are calling on other people's behalf often, because someone might not seek that service for themselves, feel awkward for whatever reason. So it's kind of a mixed bag. If we drew a map of it, it would really be, kind of all over the community, where people are, making those referrals, people self-selecting in all kinds of ways.
Now, how many referrals have you actually gotten from the hospitality field?
And unfortunately, we don't track it that way. So it's more anecdotally when we know where they come. And then the data really falls out around what county they're calling from and what need they're calling about. Not necessarily what sort of industry, but we do know that the sort of low wage jobs, although the hospitality industry is trying to address that, we do know that the high cost of housing coupled with low wages is really putting a lot of people at risk or actually, out on the street.
So what is the typical cost of housing right now here in Charleston County?
So for our clients, where we're focused on trying to house people, rents run from $1,100 to $1,500 a month, depending on the size of family and the size of apartment. I don't know what the actual, averages are. I think they're much higher when I look, literally out our window here in downtown Charleston and see all of these apartments that are 16, 17, 1,800 and more a month. So the cost of housing is really outpacing the cost of the level of wages that we typically pay in this community.
And what are those wages right now?
So we're seeing in the $16 to $19 an hour for sort of entry-level jobs. The housing wage in our community is around $24 an hour. So we've got a gap there, and that housing wage at $24 an hour roughly assumes a 40-hour work week. Well, we know there are a lot of places where people are not working 40 hours and they're making much less. So there's the gap in the actual wage, and then, of course, the gap in making sure people are actually working, able to work in full-time positions when they can and want to be able to afford basic housing.
And I know this is not a question that is relevant to you, Stacey, but how do you close that gap right now with those wages?
Employers are really going to have to step up and decide how they want to invest. And I don't mean to imply that employers are not trying to take care of their employees, because they want to have a successful business. But I do think more employers are going to have to take harder looks at their wages, at the products and services they provide, the kind of talent they want to attract. People living further. This is not just exclusive to the population we work with, but across our community, we all see it, that people have to live further and further away from where they work. So wages, transportation, cost of housing, it's sort of a trifecta that does take a lot of collaboration and coordination to address. But at the individual employer level, really, if employers could do everything they possibly can to pay their talent, then they're going to be more productive at work if they're not worried about putting a roof over their head.
Yes, ma'am, exactly right. So many hard questions to ask, and it's all wrapped in emotions here. But when it comes to the young families, Stacey, how many of those young families are you all currently seeing?
We probably enrolled in our services right now in the neighborhood of 20 or 25 families. There are usually 2 and 3 children in each family. And many of them are in their own apartment, and we're working with them to help get them stable. Some of them are actually here. We have a separate building for families. They're not in the congregate living shelter. But right now on site, we have 2 families, and those 2 families combined have 9 children. So there's a lot of complexity there. You're talking about a lot of age ranges, a lot of needs. And so on top of being homeless, they have other complexities, as every family is complicated. So the numbers on the surface might not seem huge when you think 20 families or 25 families, but the intensity of the services and the things they need to become stable, it's a lot. It is pretty labor intensive, but the payoff is well worth it. If we can stabilize the families with these 9 children, they're going to be better off in school, and then hopefully go on to lead productive lives. And this is just a small blip in their history.
Absolutely. So how many of those people are actually in apartments right now?
The vast majority. So we have 2 families on site and about 22 families or so actually in apartments. So we're providing case management.
Yes.
In a lot of cases, these families are dealing with all sorts of level of trauma and mental health issues. So we have a great partnership with MUSC to provide some very specialized mental health care for families, these at-risk families. So it's an intense relationship that we have that goes far beyond just paying rent. It really is connecting people to those critical resources so they can be successful long term.
So, what are those critical services that they need now?
Healthcare is one of the most obvious. I think we assume that all children may have Medicaid or some level of insurance. So truly physical healthcare is very important. We are seeing just as important to that is mental health services and really helping families who have had extreme trauma, children who may have witnessed extreme trauma, who are demonstrating very serious mental illness at very young ages. And so we're lucky to have a partnership with MUSC where we can really have a high level of skill come in and work with those families. Access to employment, access to transportation. Most of these families do not have vehicles of their own, so making sure they're living in a place where they can access transportation, have good access to a grocery store. Again, back to that physical health, making sure children have the nourishment and nutrition and access to those services. So it's all of the things we all need and want to live a healthy life. And how can we help bring those resources to that family and not just bring them there, but help them connect with them sustainably so that once we're not involved anymore, this family now has the tools and the knowledge and the resources to get help when they need it. So it's pretty intense, and it's simple in thought because it's what we all want for ourselves, but it's very difficult to execute, as you would imagine.
And Stacey, what other current public-private partnerships do you want to have to provide more critical services to your clients?
So certainly we are watching what's happening with our state mental health system, more funding there across the state, not just for the population we serve, is critical. We can never have too much mental health care and good ways to refer people who might not have insurance, might not have other resources. Those are critical partnerships. Continuing to partner with other organizations who are in the child welfare or youth services or human services in general so that we are not duplicating effort and are really partnering with each other. We are in this great partnership with a few legal services providers to really focus on that eviction prevention that we were talking about earlier, or homeless prevention and how eviction could play into that. So partnering with other, a legal services organization might not seem like a natural partner for us, but when we're talking about the intimidating process of going through a court system, potentially being evicted, making sure people have representation there and can, understand their rights. So those are critical partnerships. Is really these other systems that impact the clients we serve. How are we partnering in those systems to, again, not duplicate services, but make sure people have what they need to stay stably housed or become stably housed.
And Stacey, when it comes to obviously that system, what are those other trends that you and your team are currently looking at?
So homeless prevention is certainly one of them. Eviction, South Carolina is on the top of the list, and not in a good way, of places with very high eviction rates. So we're watching what's happening there. There are starting to be some movements at the state level around legislation to potentially have right to counsel, so that if I'm being evicted, I actually have a right to an attorney. So often landlords have attorneys, so we're watching those trends. Certainly what's happening at the federal level around funding as we come out of the COVID levels of funding. How are different federal funding streams going to level out? We are still working very closely with the VA on ending veteran homelessness. We've made great progress over the years. Like so many other places, we took a few steps back during COVID, but we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel there, where we really as a community are very close to ending veteran homelessness. So those are some of the trends. Funding, lessons learned from COVID. Certainly it was a very negative time for our country, but there were a lot of very valuable lessons that we've learned as providers on how better to meet the needs of very vulnerable populations. So continuing those things that were showing success when we were in crisis, then we think we'll have even much greater success once we move out of the immediate crisis of COVID.
Now, Stacey, let me ask you this. What lessons did you and your team learn during COVID when it comes to homelessness?
The gap of medical care in this state. We do not have Medicaid expansion like so many other states do. With the expiration of a lot of executive orders, people who were having access to health care are going to sort of revert to not having access to that health care. So how do we as advocates for those vulnerable populations really work together across our state to bring those resources? I think another valuable lesson that we learned during COVID is that, as I had said earlier, I'm sounding like a broken record, prevention works. If someone is in a home, if we can preserve that family in that home and not have to uproot a family, uproot children, there really are long-term positive effects. And and it's not a band-aid. We have the data now that shows once we're out of the services, once we're no longer supporting families, they are staying housed for 2 years and beyond. 88%. So that's a B plus if we're on a 100-point grading scale. But 2 years is a good long time for that independent sort of stability. So those are the lessons learned. Prevention works. We have a long way to go around eviction and protecting people from sort of predatory rental processes. And we still have to address primary health care and mental health care for vulnerable populations in this state.
So that primary care and healthcare, where do you see trends there?
We're not really seeing a lot of movement. I think there's more recognition among some of the bigger players in the healthcare world. I think, and I certainly can't speak for hospital systems and other providers, but that access to insurance in this country, access to healthcare is managed through access to insurance. So, getting vulnerable populations on insurance is key, and just really taking the lead from some of those partners that are a big player in that arena. We're a small player in that arena, but we know our population has a huge impact on emergency medical services, hospital services, mental health services. So how can we create a situation where that population has the support they need, and those providers have the revenue they need and the support they need to provide services?
Now, what are those other vulnerable populations that you all are currently looking at when it comes to the situation with healthcare?
So there's sort of two ends of the spectrum as we're looking at the homeless data. We have these young families and youth, but we also have a much older homeless population. So people in their 50s and 60s and beyond, people in their 70s becoming homeless for the first time. If they had any sort of work history, they might qualify for some sort of Social Security or benefits, but chances are they too may be uninsured. So that presents some unique challenges in sort of the aging population. And people who are becoming homeless at more advanced ages, and they do have complex medical needs, just from the virtue of they are older, that we see in our parents and grandparents.
Yes, ma'am. And going back to the VA, because I'm right down the street from there,
Yep.
let me ask you, what steps are you all moving towards when it comes to veteran homelessness, ending it, I should say?
So a lot of what has worked over the past, and just doubling down on a lot of those efforts, the VA actually has allowed organizations like ours through funding to focus more on healthcare. I think we assume because a veteran has access to the VA hospital that maybe he or she and his whole family have access to care. That might not be the case. So how do we make sure healthcare is available to that whole family? Working just hand in glove with the VA through outreach. Where are veterans? Are there veterans on the streets? Are there veterans in their cars or living in unstable conditions that we can engage with and bring in? So that we really can end veteran homelessness once and for all. So it's really more of what we know works, and having the resources to really get out in the community, find homeless veterans. Our community, in fact, just last week, as communities across the country do every year at the end of January, we do what's called the point in time count. So it's basically a homeless census. It's not as elaborate as the census. It's really one night out of the year where we are canvassing the streets, canvassing encampments, going to places where homeless people are known to congregate, and doing sort of a mini census to kind of get a handle on. It's a snapshot. It is truly that, a point in time. On this night in January of 2023, X number of people were homeless. So it'll take a little while. It'll take a few months to get that data back, but it is very instructive to know. And we're capturing things like household composition, veteran status, so we'll really know who are truly living out without a roof over their head.
And Stacey, I know you all won't get the data back for another couple of weeks or months here, but matter of fact, I was just on my run Sunday, and I was on East Bay Street, and I saw a homeless person sitting on the steps of the post office.
Mm-hmm.
Where else are you all seeing unusual places for homeless people to basically sleep and live?
I don't know that there's so much unusual, but typically you'll hear stories or maybe see encampments under bridges, or a tent or two behind a box store. A lot of times people are more hidden. They're in a car, and so they have the ability to be mobile. So that really requires our outreach teams. Because we don't just do that outreach during that point in time count. We're out all of the time trying to find people. And because we don't often have a shelter bed available, we are providing services to that person, even if they are in an encampment or in their car. And I think sometimes the general public might not recognize that. The person you saw on the steps at the post office or at the customs house, chances are our outreach workers have engaged with that person, and that person may very well be in the process to get housed. We're working on getting documentation often. getting the things together that you need to be able to apply for a lease. So a lot of case management and work actually happens with people while they are truly still on the streets.
And going back to say, you probably don't have the data for 2022 yet, but going back to 2021, for instance, what is that data when it comes to the case workers?
So, in terms of the number of people that are out on the streets,
yes,
so our point in time count last year, 2022, about 450 people, and that's a 7-county area that encompasses that number. It's the Charleston, Berkeley, Dorchester, and then Hampton, Jasper, Beaufort, Colleton are kind of our service area.
Okay.
So we canvass up to the best of our ability that entire area. And so historically, over the last several years, our community has been in that 400 to 450 people range, which might sound like a small number for a region that is really growing, but remember that is a point in time. We know many more people will have an episode of homelessness over the course of the year, in the neighborhood of probably 2,000 to 3,000 if you annualize that number. Again, working on those prevention efforts to keep people from ever falling into that cycle is so key.
Yes, ma'am. So I know obviously part of your mission is obviously ending, but also preventing homelessness in the region. So how are you ending, but also preventing homelessness when the region is actually growing every day?
Keeping ahead of the growth and the trend, sure, that's a challenge. And quantifying the problem, that's why this point in time count every year is so important. Because as our population grows, are we also seeing the growth in homelessness from a numbers perspective, which you try not to get too caught up in the statistics because we are talking about people. So really working across that spectrum, if we can prevent it from happening, great. If not, when it does happen, how do we as a community have the resources to very quickly move someone out of homelessness? So it really has to be a both and, not an either or situation.
Now, what is the culture of service that focuses on the mission of 180 Place and ensures the dignity of both men and women that you all are actually preserving?
So we really we have 5 core values that we believe, and they're on our computer screens and on our bulletin boards. And we are really focused on safety. We want our staff, our clients, our volunteers to feel safe, because you really can't tackle anything in life if you don't feel safe. We really work from a place of respect and view that everyone has a strength to bring to the conversation. Homeless people are not helpless people. They often know what they need and how to solve their situation, just need the connections to do that. We see great resiliency. That is another value that we encourage. You've never seen someone more resilient than a mother looking for a home, or someone to take care of her child. And along with that resiliency goes one of our other values around determination. Really sticking to it, knocking down barriers as they come. And then another thread that we have really committed a lot of resources to over the past few years are equity. Racial equity, all sorts of equity, and how are we making sure that we are doing the best for all of our clients, regardless of race, gender, any other identity or demographic that you want to measure, and that we are seeing the same positive outcomes across all of the populations we serve. So we found that if we really stay focused on those 4 values of safety, respect, resilience, determination, and equity, we can end and prevent homelessness in an equitable, meaningful way.
Now, what have been the current outcomes as far as racial equity?
So we have done our first year, been able to look at our first year of data, and we see that we have no disparity between the outcomes of our clients of color and our white clients. So that was refreshing. We can't rest on our laurels. We need to make sure that we are not doing things to further create disparity. We know people of color fall into homelessness at higher rates than white people. That's the upstream work that has to be done. That's the prevention work. That's the systems work that needs to be done. But what we've at least determined at 180 Place is when someone does come into our care, their outcomes are not determined by the color of their skin. That we are working with all kinds of populations, age, gender, race, ethnicity, and the outcomes are not disparate between those populations.
And when you go to the Caucasian population, do you see an uptick with homelessness there?
Not really. I mean, they're kind of staying. It's typically been in our population about 70% people of color and about 30% white. That does not mirror the community racially data. That hasn't changed much. It vacillates a little bit over time. Where we see disparities or significant changes are in sort of those subsets, like families or elderly people or things like that. Veterans at one time, but now because we've had such an infusion of resources over the last 12 years or so, we are seeing that's those significant declines.
So where do you see exactly the declines with veteran homelessness?
Where do we see them?
Yes, ma'am.
So that again goes back to those partnerships and those relationships. So we work with the VA. They have an outreach center up near Mall Drive. VA hospital is close to where you are, close to where we are as well. So really working with those partnerships and meeting the veteran where they are. Some of them actually do come to live here at 180 Place in our shelter, but many of them bypass the shelter and do move straight into an apartment of their own.
So how many of those have actually done that in the past year?
Last year, we ended or prevented homelessness for close to 500 veterans.
Wow. And where are they moving to in the region? I know you serve Charleston, Berkeley, Dorchester, Hampton, Beaufort.
Right. Primarily Charleston County, some in Berkeley County, but really where the affordable housing is getting harder and harder to find. So it's typically not on the peninsula. It's usually, in the West Ashley area or the North Charleston area. And a lot of that is driven by, does someone have employment? Do they need access to transportation? Do they have school-age children? So we try to match the housing need with the family or individual needs and desires.
Now, approximately, Stacey, how many people are experiencing homelessness in Charleston that are chronically homeless, meaning long-term or multiple episodes of homelessness?
So the chronic homeless population is holding steady at around 10% of the total homeless population. So let's just use 400 for easy math. So if at a point in time we have 400 people who we know are experiencing homelessness in our region, about 40 of those would kind of meet that definition of chronically homeless. And again, while the number might not seem large, their service needs are very intense. So it is in our best interest as a community to focus on those who are most vulnerable, target those resources towards that. So it typically has been holding steady at about 10% of the overall homeless population, or meet that. It's kind of a technical definition that you rattled off very well. That's great. That technical definition of chronically homeless, long-term homeless, or many episodes of homelessness. So it's a small percentage.
Yes, ma'am. And what has that been, say, year to year?
It's been holding steady pretty consistently for the last several years. Probably, I've been at this now almost 19 years, right. And it's really been about 10% of that overall homeless population is pretty. It's pretty much this. It's not the same people, obviously, but the percentage-wise has been holding steady at around 10%.
Now, how many people in Charleston who are actually experiencing homelessness actually have I hate to use these words, but chronic substance abuse issues?
So we don't really parse it out quite that specifically, because we want to really focus on the overarching issue of this person does not have a place to live. And what we have also learned over the years is that substance use or substance abuse is typically a symptom of homelessness and not a cause. So if I'm sleeping on the street, I may turn to someone else who's on the street, and we may share a beverage or something that kind of becomes soothing or sort of self-medicating. So we often see the substance use or the substance abuse enter the equation after the person has become homeless. So we really try to work with the whole person, work with what's important to them, get them housed first, and then work on other issues, whether substance abuse, mental health, employment and training, and really just focusing on that primary condition of, I don't have a roof over my head, everything else can wait until I have a safe place to sleep.
Sure. So you mentioned this a lot in the interview actually today, but you talked about mental illness. So how many people in Charleston who are actually experiencing homelessness actually have a serious mental health issue?
So that definition can get very technical and complicated, and that probably is, in the 20% to 30% range. The process of becoming homeless can be very traumatizing. So we often see immediate effects, that might be a little bit more episodic, but then there are those smaller numbers of people who have more serious and persistent mental illness that do need ongoing care, perhaps medication. That 20 to 30%, again, it's a hard number to quantify, particularly because so many people, not just homeless people, so many people are walking around undiagnosed. And so you don't really know until you engage and have a relationship with that person and start really filtering through what are the things preventing you from being successful in the way that you define success. And for us, we hope that success means you want to be stably housed. Have not yet met someone who does not want to be housed. So the idea that someone chooses to be homeless just really is not, it doesn't play out when you talk to people. After almost 20 years, I've never heard someone say, oh, I like life on the street. I might not like someone's rules, or I might not like some element that I don't think I want to conform to, but I've never heard anyone say, I enjoy being homeless.
Not at all. And I've known you for that long.
Yeah. We're getting old, Quintin.
I'm almost pushing 40 myself. So
you're still a baby.
Right. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. I'm still trying to stay young as I can.
I know. You're doing a great job.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you greatly. But from the time that you started, obviously at 180 Place to right now, what is the biggest difference about homelessness?
I think the idea that it is solvable. I think the community believes that we can actually end homelessness. I think we've seen as our community has really changed demographically, people from larger cities have moved here. They have very different ideas around the homeless population. They're in larger cities where it is much more visible. So I think the attitudes around the issue have changed dramatically in about almost close to 20 years that I've been working on this issue. I think there is a stronger belief that we need to end homelessness, not just manage it, not just hide people, not just move homeless people out of the popular tourist areas or further and further away from the city center. That really we have a group of service providers and thankfully donors and supporters who believe in ending homelessness, not just managing it. It is actually more economical to get someone out of the cycle of jail or out of the cycle of in the ER and actually be in their apartment where they can thrive and not misuse and abuse sort of those community resources that are limited. So that's been a big change, is that really viewing homelessness as a community-wide problem that can have community-wide solutions. I don't think that was quite the attitude in 2004 when I first got here. It was more about we're still recovering from base closure to a degree at that point. The Upper Peninsula did not look like it does now, right. So we'll just keep pushing homeless people further and further. Thankfully, that attitude has changed, and this is we now understand there is a cure is not quite the right word, but we do have the solutions to end homelessness, and we are just lucky that so many people in this community believe in that and support our work.
Now, Stacey, you mentioned this, and this is obviously happening every day that is here in Charleston, but talk to me about those people who come from these other cities and come to you all with ideas to really end homelessness.
Mm-hmm. So that's been very refreshing as we get to know donors and volunteers and others that have connected with this issue in another community, that they have seen the problem much larger and really want to and have recognized that we can solve it. Let's not hit that tipping point in Charleston. And so that's been a great way to get to know some of those individuals that have interacted with other systems, learning from those other communities, sharing those success stories, best practices, so that we don't become a place where there's 10 or 12 or 50,000 people on the street. There are a lot of lessons to learn from a community like Los Angeles. We're very different, obviously, in a lot of ways, but at some point, they hit a tipping point. So how do we not hit, and what is that? And so, at least for now, we feel like we're in a place where this is solvable, this is doable. And I think people who have seen the problem on a much bigger scale really appreciate the coordination that we have among service providers and different partners in this community to fix the problem, and we're not competing with each other. We're really collaborating and working together.
And where do you see this tipping point heading next?
I don't know. This is something that we've talked about a lot as we look at data. What is that number in Charleston? If we hit 1,000 people on the street on a given night, does that mean we can't return from it? Is it 800? I don't know. Maybe there's a mathematician or a statistician that's watching your this close up, and can help us figure out what is that formula. How do we quantify that and know that that's out there and not ever work towards it? Always make sure But what we do know is if we can keep moving the needle in the other direction, we shouldn't hit that tipping point. But I would love to be able to quantify what that is. Is there a community out there that said once we went from 999 homeless people to 1,000, it became unsolvable, or whatever that number might be?
Stacey Denaux with 180 Place. Thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin. It's great to see you.
Likewise.